progressive government in power again, one of the first things they should do is make the Privy Council televised like Parliament, and that all its deliberations should be subject to freedom of information requests. Otherwise, we're being ruled by a secret cabal, like in the days of yore. That's ridiculous. We ought to be living in a modern, progressive, more enlightened state than that. Otherwise, what's the point of the Enlightenment? We just go back to the medieval times and they can put people like me in the tower and torture us. No, thank you, you can't. We have had Kant. We have had, the Enlightenment, and we had the abolition of torture. So, anyway, Chilcot's gone. Great shame, because I think he, he had a few questions to answer, in my opinion, as to how and why he let Gordon Brown set up a dummy kind of commission, which didn't have the power to ask the right questions of the right people. So, little old me, I've set it up. It's called the Commission of Inquiry into 9/11, the history of 9/11. It's for historians. We meet once a year. We meet on the 9/11 date each year, online. And so I'd like to invite the people in that film, The Unspeakable, to appear and give evidence next year on, the 11th of September. And The Unspeakable is an important metaphor, and it's taken, as they say at the end of the documentary, from Thomas Merton's work, Raids on the Unspeakable. Thomas Merton is a great theologian, thinker, philosopher who inspired me as a young man. He was a monk. He's actually born here in France, in fact, and partly educated here. He then went to New York and studied literature at Columbia University, which I know and love as a university. And he then realised that academia wasn't for him because it's too sort of competitive and too narrow and too much about ego and, I've done this and I'm better than you kind of stuff. So he gave all that up and became a monk, bless him, a Trappist monk in Gethsemane, a monastery in Kentucky, and lived there for the last 20 or 30 years of his life. And he became a peace activist in the 60s because you can't sit back whilst the world's falling apart in the hands of evil people and do nothing and call yourself a Christian or anything. You can't call yourself Jewish or Buddhist and not protest against the idiots that at that time were pounding Vietnam. And quite right, Thomas Merton stood up and protested, and he led marches, and he was friends with Martin Luther King and Thich Nhat Hanh when he was a young man. They set up the World Conference on Religion and Peace in those days, which I was Secretary General of for 10 years, in Britain and Ireland, and which is still going. So yes, Thomas Merton, hats off, mate. And his book, Raids on the Unspeakable, it's a way of saying we have to talk about what can't be talked about. And that's what the documentary, The Unspeakable, is. It's like, it's raids on what nobody's talking about, because the truth is valuable. We need to find out the truth. Nowadays, robbers spend years trying to break into a bank and steal stuff. We're the Robin Hood gang trying to break into the vaults of knowledge and take out a little bit of truth, So I just want to say that I wrote a book some time ago about all this, coincidentally, long before they called their documentary The Unspeakable. I called it Further Raids on the Unspeakable, Conversations on the Edge Between a Scientist and a Philosopher. And I co-wrote this with my colleague, Dr. Eva Sorovnik. We published it in 2014. And we discussed things like God and the philosophy of science, peace, conflicts in the Middle East, peace between the genders, memory. It was a really interesting series of dialogues. And it's further raids on the unspeakable. And in the very last chapter, I produced an essay which I called Towards a Critical Epistemology of Ignorance. And I just want to flag this up because anyone that wants the book, it's published, it's available. And it seems to me as philosophers that it's lovely to focus on wisdom. What is wisdom? I mean, kind of by now we kind of know what wisdom is. It's self-reflection. It's the ability to perceive the soul. It's understanding the immortality of the soul, as Plato said, as Aeschylus and the mystery initiates said. And it's being able to download that cosmic consciousness into your life situation, wherever you are, into your present incarnation. Yeah, that's wisdom. What is not really known is, well, how come there's ignorance? If there's that potentiality in people, how come we're not all enlightened? Why are some people really ignorant, like the Epsteins or the Johnsons or the Prince Andrews? Sorry, Andrew, but, got to call you out on this. You really need to give evidence, mate. Why do people do ignorance? And that's what I addressed in my chapter, because ignorance studies is the ugly duckling of philosophy, but it's the opposite to wisdom studies. And what we need is to really get active around ignorance studies, because the ignorant people are taking over the planet. I mean, they always have been. And, what is ignorance? And how does it manifest? How do you spot it? And how do you contradict it? How do you educate out for it? I mean, I became a teacher. Obviously, I trained as an academic and a school teacher because I thought education is the key. But if education is the key, ignorance is the enemy, and it's rife out there. And I've itemized in this work, I call it agniology, a variety of ways that ignorance there's ignorance caused by verbal insults, ignorance caused by shouting and abuse, ignorance caused by, in an extreme case, killing people of wisdom, ignorance caused by the bureaucratic incarceration and silencing of thinkers and people of wisdom, such as the imprisonment of Julian Assange. It's nice that Craig Murray got out finally. There was another attempt to silence a man of wisdom. Then there's physical martyrdom, torture and death of people of wisdom, mocking behaviour. There's extreme cynicism as to the possibility of humans being wise. These are all strategies adopted by ignorance and people of ignorance to sort of put out there, no, there's no such thing as wisdom, you can't be wise. And it's a sort of silencing of the work of philosophy. Then there's the silencing of rival varieties of wisdom and saying, no, there's only one type, monotypology of wisdom. That's the natural sciences, or our theology, or our tradition. Anyway, I've given the whole gamut here and it's just a raid on the unspeakable. I can't, this is like to study ignorance in all its variety. I mean, I wrote this back in 2014. I mean, the amount of ignorance generated since there, 8 years ago, fill mountains. I mean, I could fill hundreds of books on further raids on the unspeakable, on what's been going on in ignorance studies since then. But I need your help. We need to be like a secret society of wisdom lovers who conspire together to defeat ignorance. This is epistemology as a combat sport. It's a martial art, or an irenic art. We need to really clue in together and work together. That's why I belong to various projects and networks of wisdom seekers, trying to find an antidote to the floods, the tsunami of ignorance that we've been suffering from. My watchword remains, dare to be wise, as Kant said, sapere aude, and find that sort of truth that can cut through these layers of ignorance in ourselves and others. Okay, I'm going to finish there with one last thing, my poem. I hope you've enjoyed this month's talk. I'm sharing, thoughts as I'm producing them. I'm going to read a poem called Libations to Athene, which is from volume 3 of my collected works. I've been to Athens several times. It's my to die for city, I love Athens, I always will. It's my other home. And it is the home of the Promethean games. And, I take my hat off for Pericles and Plato and all the other, Aeschylus and the team of initiates that tried to make life a bit more civilized. All those that went through the Eleusinian mysteries, may they be restarted, and may we come together and inherit a world of peace and democracy and truth and freedom of thought, all the things that Prometheus and Athena stand for. Okay, here's my poem. It's called Libations to Athene, and I wrote it in Athens. In the beginning, I tethered trails of light and swept down like snow. I curved trails by question marks in the winter sky and collected absolutions for sins not yet imagined. I walked on rainbow bridges where flocks of birds count the souls of the dead. There was the promise of you from the beginning, being the one being, an oval, an egg shape, a galaxy, an aura that burnt all possibility out of compassion. I ran ships for you across oceans that have yet had no name. I made libations to Poseidon. He is still the one. Yet with one glance from your raised eyebrows, the universe stops and begins to unfold. With one of your laughs, you remove all possible grounds for seriousness. With one glimpse of your owl-like eyes, I will remember everything and nothing at once. Remember the thought you had before you knew your mind was separate from the world? At that first springing, when the sun was shining and new, like an old new friend? Remember the first time you managed a sum and the numbers computed, and you leapt inside at the wonder of being? Remember the first song you made of the first harmonies, how they ran from your fingers like the hair above your beloved's face, and you brought forth fire, sweet in the midst of the darkness, in the dark dusk storms of winter. Remember the sound the trees make as they howl, threatening to break, but don't. They hold on to their roots, as we must now. Remember something you cannot speak that birthed you into being, some sense of wholeness, some dreaming that makes you arise again, newborn. Remember all those words you had piled high like wood, which are there to build something. All those verbs like cranes, which are busy hauling levees into place in case it floods. All those adjectives are there to point the angles of the beams right and position them square and rising and descending. All those nouns, they are the foundations of the building, the inner core of sediment that holds the weight and won't crack. They will withstand your carrying on. They're the truth within. They're the bones of the kingdom. And those adverbs that you throw in occasionally, subtly, gently, they're the meaning behind the actions. They're the ghosts that make the plot real because supernatural. They're the contract you shape between being and nothingness, curved like a smile, or the breast of a goddess, round and full like the moon. Remember those times when fear forces an entrance upon you. Astound it with a flower, zen-like, that jolts it back into the remembrance of the whole. That way, it becomes a friend you have helped back to remembrance. That way, it becomes a truth that had momentarily become dislodged from the all. That way, it becomes a fellow wisdom lover you can dance with forever.